Some stories don't just inspire you, they claim you, they pull you in until you can't look away. In this part of our journey, Sasha-Gay Lewis shares the stories that chose her to tell, from the Incursion in Tivoli Gardens, School's Challenge quiz, and Surviving Suicide documentary. Let's listen. You're listening to Adventures of a Wallflower, where silence gets loud. I'm your host, J.D. Morgan, and here untold stories, hidden truths, and quiet journeys take center stage. From resilience to creativity, from pain to triumph, every episode peels back the layers of the human experience. Let's step inside the stories that shapes us. Let's dive into your work now. Your films don't just entertain, they interrogate. They step into wounds, national, personal, historical, and ask hard questions. I want to sit with you in that fire for a moment. Let's talk about the projects that demanded the most of you. First up, which I was quite surprised when I viewed your page to saw this for, should be quite inspiring. Incursion, Tivoli Gardens, trauma, voicelessness. What compelled you to take on that story? How did it change how you understood power, fear, and justice? And at the time, I would have seen the incursion happening through TV, but you actually went out and talked to the community itself after the fact.
So here's the thing, like, if you, I'm one of those people where, like, injustice is my kryptonite. Like, it really is. Like, I'm better at, like, fighting for others than I am for myself. Like, I was a kid in school where, like, if you tried to bully somebody because they were different, I'll fight you. Like, I don't need to know the kid, like, at all. It's just like, I'm just like, nah, you ain't, we ain't doing this. So, like, that is the root of that, right? And I was like that, even, growing up within my situation. I would fight back. Like, I'm a quiet kid, but, like, don't let that fool you. There is a fire in me. So, like, any unfairness, I'm going to fight back. And I think, like, the Tivoli story, I was working in Jamaica at the time. I was a journalist at the time, actually working for the government, and as a journalist with the government, I believe I was working with the Jamaica Information Service, which the Jamaica Information Service is a media house that pretty much promotes the work of the government of Jamaica, so on a typical basis, there are things that, like, you work with JIS, you are aware of that, like, the public doesn't know, because you are, you have a relationship with ministries and ministers and all of those things, and I remember being there and watching the news and, seeing all the broadcasts, both locally and internationally. And I was just like, I think the thing that I was angered by, like, what the people were experiencing, but I was also angered by this thing that I find that people do and are not always mindful of, and, need to always be careful of how they talk about a thing, but they don't give the context. Like, context is crucial in everything. Like, no, you might see someone behaving a certain way and you're just, oh, they're just mean, they're just that. But it's just like, are they though? Like, what's their context? Like, what's their story? Like, what have they experienced that has, like, resulted in what you're seeing? Like, it never starts at where you are seeing it or interacting with it. it sometimes starts long before that. And so, I remember at the time, because I was working with the government, I couldn't do nothing really. Because the conflict of interest and all of these things. And I told myself, like, and at that time I was in my own personal, professional, like, shifting that was happening for me, of just like, do I want to be doing this work? Because it just restricted me, that allowed me, that it did give me freedom to, like, be the storyteller that I wanted to be, or the journalist and writer that I wanted to be. And so, like, I was going through this kind of like deep questioning of, like, do I want to even continue, like, being in that space? And the answer was like, no. And I was trying to get clear on, like, what is it that I ultimately want? Like, what is the thing that I'm afraid to say that I want to do and be? And it was that I wanted to be a filmmaker. And I was just like, well, how do you do that? Because, like, there's no film school in Jamaica. Like, you've already done the best school in the Caribbean as it relates to media and communication. And you didn't just do it. You were one of 80 that got in at the time. And you also left there as one of the top students. Like, so I was just like, what you are supposed to do in Jamaica and the Caribbean as it pertains to the, like, media and production space, you have done it. So, and there's no film school in Jamaica or the Caribbean. And so it's just like, oh, you are going to have to leave, which was, I was more focused on that dream than anything, because, like, I like many Jamaicans are just like, I was born and grown and raised in Jamaica. I have my love for my country. I was never the kid that would be like, oh, like, the United States is so much better and that's where I want. No, you couldn't tell me nothing. Like, Jamaica was and is, like, the best place for me in the world, no matter where I go, right? That was how loyal and, like, patriotic, I have always been as it pertains to my country. And so, I tussled with that decision for a little bit, I'm just like, man, like, foreign, this new place, like, I've never been foreign minded like this. Do I want to do that? But it was just like, I had a deeper desire to give myself the permission to do the thing that I knew my heart wanted to do. And I was just at this point where I was willing. It felt like something in me would have died if I did not take the risk and go and explore that. And I was like, if I explore it and it doesn't work and I have to come back home, at least I would know for myself. But I was never going to live with the regret of just because of fear not doing it. I wanted to see what I was capable of. And, like, if this little insight thing that I knew was just, like, the truth. And so I came to the US and, did my master's in film, and I made up, like, I remember saying to myself, there are two stories that I would want to tell if ever I get the opportunity to. And it was definitely the Incursion story and the School Challenge Quiz story. Those were, like, the two, like, without shadow of a doubt, like, Jamaican stories that I just knew, like, if God blessed me to be successful in this space and I get the opportunity to, like, be like, what are the stories you want to tell? Like, these are going to be the ones. And so when I was in film school, we had to do a final project where we got support to go and tell the story that, like, we would want to tell, almost like in a way to create this proof of concept to be able to, like, leave film school with, like, this proof of concept to then continue. And I was like, okay, I'm going to do the Incursion, because at the time, I don't remember what was happening, but the research that I was doing I was uncovering so many things, and I was just, that was, some of them were like confirmation, and others were just like, oh, I didn't know this. And like, but it was like a rabbit hole that like I enjoyed. And I was just like, ooh, like, I was fascinated. And so I told the story, but separate apart from all of that, my mom is a higgler. Like, and what we call those in Jamaica, a higgler is like an independent seller. Those persons that you see on the road with their shops, or, they're entrepreneurs. That's what they are, really. But, in Jamaica, class is everything. So like, you'll never be like, oh, this is an uptown a higgler. They'll be like, oh, that's an entrepreneur. But if you're downtown, oh yeah, man, I want higgler that. So, and I would frequent downtown a lot of times because that's where she would buy her goods, and then, transport them to Ocho Rios because that's where her shop was, like in the tourist district of Ocho Rios. But I would be downtown with her when she would go shopping and meet all of these people in the market and on the streets and everything. And a lot of those people lived in Tivoli. And so for me, like, I met those people as people. I didn't meet them as like, oh, they are doing the work of criminals and they are just not good people. They're bad people. That's not what I met when I was in those markets and seeing these people, like, taking them and making fashion and just like wanting the best for themselves and their children, like that's how I met them. And so for me, it was just like, the narrative felt like counter to what I experienced and knew. And as an in the streets, as we would say, person through by way of my mom and my stepdad, like I knew that things weren't always what they seemed. And so I went there because I just feel like everybody was talking about, Christopher Cole, talking about the politics, talking about the criminality of it. But I'm just like, but what about the people? Like, what about the people? Like, it's easy to be like, oh, those people over there deserve to live a certain way or be treated a certain way because in your estimation or your class's viewpoint, you're just like, I'm better. But like, we might not be the same, but we're like, equals. Like we're both human beings. We bleed the same way. We hurt the same way. We want the same things for our family and our children and ourselves. And so I'm just like, that is universal. And I just knew that if that situation had happened, in Upper St. Andrew, or in the Golden Triangle, it would have been a different story altogether. And it just felt unfair to me, like it's just that idea of who is deserving of safety and security, like, and how we pick and choose who that should be based on like, where people are from, or how they talk or how they choose to live their lives. And I was just like, it, it, what is good for the goose has to be good for the gander. Like it cannot, and as a government, you cannot play partisan in that way. It's a dangerous game that you play because it always comes back around. That's what I tell people. You always think like, oh, I don't have to deal with that. It won't reach me. And then it eventually comes to your door. Like, because what you allow, if you stand for nothing, you fall for everything. And so like, that is the reason why I wanted to do the Tivoli story. I felt like the real story was being buried because nobody was really talking to the people. Or when they talked to the people, they spoke to them from a point of like, they knew more about the truth of, their reality than they did. And, for me, because I moved from a place of curiosity, I was just like, nah, there is so much more here. And so that's why I did the incursion.
It's good to get that perspective because, as I said, a lot of people would do a broad brush and say everybody from this particular era is this way. And most times, I think, based on my experience that I've seen and the life that I've lived, I realize we experience similar things just from different lens, so to speak. So obviously we don't look the same, but we pretty much go through the same things. But for instance, one of the things that, well, comes to mind is like I would say, depression. Like,
Mm-hmm.
poor person would say depression is a rich people thing. But really
Mm-hmm.
and truly, we know that everyone's going through depression from time to time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and poor people are more, I would say, predisposed to it because they're existing in crushing realities like all the time. It's just that I might have a different language for it, but like it's the same thing. And I think like a lot of times like that is where we trip up on ourselves. Like we are talking about the same thing, but somehow we convince ourselves that we are not, like, because if you can see it, you can see it in the behavior of people who like from poor backgrounds who are just like, it's harder for them to stop because the circumstances that they have to deal with, like they're in survival mode. So survival mode does not even give them the space to assess their feelings or
I think
emotions.
long term,
Yeah, I have no time for that. Like, stopping to do that might mean I can't feed my kid, or it's a fear. You asked me about like the incursion, what does what does it change or help me understand about power and fear and justice? And it's just like, it allowed me to understand how for many of us, fear is the driver of our lives. And we don't know. We don't realize that, right? Because it's just like, you know, and across the board, right? Like, and just how in certain spaces, fear is a dangerous thing to have, right? Because it is almost like I saw how fear showed up in the police force, and the perceived fear that they had that made them do this. It's either you or me situation that played out in that, and how, fear in terms of even the individuals that was caught in the crossfire of just like, well, if there are criminals here and these are the people that I coexist with and live with every day, and you're asking me to what? To like, oh, snitch on them, but I have to go back to the same place while you go wherever you are safer. Like, are you going to remove me and take me out? Are you going to give me somewhere else? Like, since you've already deemed that this is where I belong, like, and just like that fear of like, well, this is the evil I know. So like, that's the evil I'm going to take the risk with, because I don't know what's on the other side of it. And so like, it showed me how the, the incestuous relationship between fear and power and injustice and how it's all linked. And a lot of times the things that we do under the guise of, oh, it's for the best for the people, it is just fear masquerading as power. It is just fear masquerading as love. It is just fear masquerading as concern. Because if your solution or redemption for someone or for a thing does not empower them to be able to make that change for themselves without you, then is that really, that feels like control. That feels like you still kind of like, codifying that hierarchy that, that, that still creates like an above and a beneath. But like, how do we truly level the playing field? And like, we're on the same level. So those are some of the things like that project, like really opened my eyes up to like be conscious of not of how fear is showing up in your life and how fear is showing up in your decisions, and doing that work to be clear on is this a fear thing or is this a fate thing? Is this me trying to, squeeze out power for myself, or this is me trying to really truly be of service And I think a lot of us need to ask ourselves those questions, and a lot of people in government need to absolutely ask themselves that question.
I do hope you continue to do these type of documentaries so that, if not just one side is being told, all side is being heard, um, that way we can like better inform the decisions. I hope people will be more open to actually listening to others. Even if they don't understand them right away, at least you have the whole picture, so to speak.
Yeah, and understanding doesn't necessarily mean I have to agree, right? Like, and I think that's where again we get like so wrong. It's just like everyone's trying to be right, and it's just like I don't. It should not. It should be less of trying to be right and more of trying to understand, right? Because like I don't necessarily have to like live your exact life to understand like the things you've gone through or how they've impacted you, right? Because certain things are universal, right? I know what hurt is. I know what harm is. I know what love it feels like. And maybe that is the challenge, that a lot of us don't know what those things are, right? And because we don't know, it is harder for us to like understand it in other people's realities, and so understanding should be the goal, not being right.
So true. Take the six of seed in the other projects. The surviving suicide, the people's fissure, where cultures collide. These projects explore trauma, identity, spiritual swallowing, architecture as identity. How do you choose which stories fit you and which you must try this?
So I don't think I choose my projects. My projects choose me, to be honest, because again, for me, this work isn't about self. And I know people will be like, what do you mean? You're a filmmaker. How isn't it about self? And it's because like I just see myself as a vessel to the story. And I don't always have the right words to explain it, because a lot of times it is a feeling. It's not a language. It doesn't like, transform or transmute into language. It doesn't always work like that, right? It's like surviving suicide was a project that, again, it was like the things that show up when I get quiet enough to listen to myself, of just like what is being asked to be birthed at this time. And of course, as a filmmaker, I have stories that I have a preference that I want to like tell, but I am not as in control of that as I would like to tell myself, because like what is being asked to be born will show up, right? That's how it works for me. I understand that that's not how it works for everybody. So let me just clarify that. That's how the creative process works for me. And it's about obedience in the sense of like, what is the thing that is tugging at me in this moment? And how can I be of service to that? And there have been things where like, as creative, like we're confident, but we also deal with a lot of like doubt and second guessing and questioning as well. Like, I mean, we are the embodiment of the this and that, if I'm supposed to be honest. Like, because there are projects where it's just like, it's just like, oh my God, like, can I do this? Can I really do this? I don't know. Like, and it's just always like, well, do you feel called to it? And if the answer is that I feel called to it, like I'm always going to say yes and figure it out as I go along. And there are some projects that it's just a clear yes. Surviving suicide was a project that it's a story I wanted to tell, because that project looked at suicide from the perspective of survivors. And survivors not only like, oh, the mother of a child that died, but survivors from the perspective of someone who attempted it and failed. And now, you thought you were going to die and leave this world, but now you wake up in a hospital bed and now you have to face your decision and you have to face the people that you love and how this decision would have affected them. And, you're still here. What do you do with all of that? And I was always curious about that angle to it because again, like when I consume a lot of films, media, like I'm a carnivore of those things. I wasn't seeing that perspective being explored as it relates to suicide. And, I started that project. I was fresh in LA. I knew nobody. I had no connections. And I just was moving from, what the agitation I had internally. And that project was a project of faith. Of just like, this thing was downloaded into you, and I call stuff downloads, and those are when like my God gives me like, input stuff into me. And I just followed it. I followed the breadcrumbs and followed the breadcrumbs. And then I got access to this whole suicide survivors community in California. So much so that like at the time, I had so many people who wanted to tell me their stories, but I didn't have the resources to really like be able to do all of them, that I had to be like, I'm so sorry. Like, I can't, I'm not able to do your story. And so like, even that experience of just like, oh, it's always important to listen to that voice, because if you follow those breadcrumbs, it will lead you to where you need to go. And also the help will come, and trusting that the help will come is how I ended up at that story. And I met Anthony Rodriguez, who is a 3-time suicide survivor, who is now like a local hero on the front lines, helping young people and adults, in suicide, right? Like how this person literally transformed his hurt and his pain and his shame into, being the change, being on the front line and helping others and being in service to others, and just like the phoenix in his story, right? Like the transformation in his story of how he moved from this place of just like feeling unwanted and broken, and have like been able to build into this person who is now intercepting on the front lines for people who are where he used to be, and just like even having that experience, how about changed my life. Anthony is a part of my family, because the thing that he would always say, like, listen, you are the first person who like really wanted to understand. Like, there's something in your approach that made me feel like you saw me, you understood it. Because fundamentally, there's so much judgments around suicide, when the truth was, people who attempt suicide don't really want to die. They just want the pain to stop. And like, attempting to kill themselves is their way of stopping that pain, right? And oftentimes it is a pain that is not seen, right? Families don't see it, your loved ones don't see it. They just like how they want the noise to stop, they want the pain to stop, right? And it's not necessarily from a place of hate. It's from a place of love, right? Because you are in this like negative pain cycle that tells you are broken, you're not good enough, and therefore you are a burden to your loved ones. And the loving thing to do is to unburden them, right? That is the narrative that you are crippled by. And it is to be able to like intercept that narrative, right, in real time, to be able to like get people to choose life, right? And so when you're in that overwhelmed space, it's just like you have to look at the next like best thing. Like, how do I help you get to the next minute, to the next 10 minutes, to the next hour, to the next day, right? It has to be incremental. Otherwise, you're going to lose a lot of people, right? And again, the power of story to say like, I know what you are going through because I have been there. You know, I've had suicide ideations or like I attempted my life, whatever your story is, to be able to say like, I'm no different from you and I'm still here. And because I tried and I'm still here, like I can tell you some things, right? Like, let's have a conversation. And so that's where that project like blossom from, of just how do we get people into conversation, into the real conversations, into the vulnerable conversations around suicide and mental health, and not into this like judgment, because people again fear what they don't understand. So in my mind, if I help people understand things, then there is less fear, and now we can be there for each other.
Could not agree more. I especially understand the suicide parts of life. I used to believe like people who commit suicides are cowards or, because honestly, I've never thought that I would ever go so far to quick break. If you're thinking about mindset, money, or making moves in business, check out the Andrew Ovid podcast. Andrew, who joined us back in season 2, episode 2, dives into sales, financial literacy, and personal growth with stories and interviews that actually stick. Catch it on YouTube or Facebook. It's a dose of insight you don't want to skip. Right. So I honestly used to look down on anybody that committed suicide. I would have been thinking about committing suicide. Not that I didn't understand that they were going through pain, but I just couldn't comprehend thinking about committing that, suicide. But recently, I've been diagnosed with ADHD, so I've been in a type of mourning phase of the person who I could have been if I knew how my brain operated or what my brain lacked and so forth. And then with basically moving away from a job that I thought was actually going to grow, I've been in a grieving state and I've been reached a completely depressed mood where I was like, I couldn't actually now really understand why. And as you said, is to stop the pain, because the pain that I was feeling wasn't just a pain for me, but for the people that loved me and wanted to help me, but just didn't understand. And
Right.
when we talked about the feeling that I'm having, they just couldn't understand it. So it's like, I can't talk about it.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, thank you for sharing that. And I know what that is. And I think like a lot of I knew there was a different perspective because I was like, I've been there. Like life has like crushed me, or I've gone through things in life where like, I just want to tap out, right? Like I was listening to this podcast in real life by Angie Martinez, and she was talking to Regina King, who, she lost her son, Ian, to suicide. And, she was saying, she was talking about the challenges of having to navigate that loss. And she had this thing where she said she spoke to a friend, and the friend was like, you mean this dirty ass earth? Like, as always. And I'm just like, yes, because there are times when you go through and you're like, just this dirty ass world, like, this world that just can be so overwhelming and mean and cruel, and just like, clearly it's not solely that, but like we go through seasons, and some people unfortunately like are in seasons of crushing more than other people are. And is for us to understand that, as I said earlier, the pendulum can swing. Like, the pendulum can swing. Like, the difference between you not having the crushing I'm having is potentially that you have a better support system, or that, like, you don't have ADHD, so, like, it's not warping your brain. And then also, like, it also understanding the science behind it. It's just like the judgment comes from a place where we move through the world believing that we are all the same. And that's not true. Like, some of us carry layers of things that others of us don't. And I think even on that project, one of the things that, like, was eye-opening for me was like, I spoke to a suicidologist, a doctor that, like, specializes in studying the brain, with a framework around mental health and suicide, so they could understand, like, fundamentally, like, what was different in how the brain was processing, the ups and downs of life for people who are more predisposed to, like, suicide versus people who are not. And then they realize that, the part of the brain that it allows us to process, like, hurt and pain in people who are more predisposed to suicide is not as developed as the brain of those who don't think about it, or who is able to resist suicide. Like, there is a chemical imbalance there. And so once you start understand that, it's just like, now it's not how do you judge that person? Right? Because you understand that, like, their makeup is different, which means that, like, they're gonna move through the world different. In the same way you said, like, the discovery of learning you had ADHD and learning about, like, how your brain functions differently, it kind of frees you in a way, because now you're just like, oh, this explains why. Like, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't know how to explain it. And now I have, like, a real thing to be able to understand. And now the challenge for you is to learn how to accept yourself, as someone who has ADHD, and how to create a life that, like, helps you navigate that, which you just know, like, it cannot be, your life can't, like, what works for your sister will never work for you, because your sister does not have this diagnosis, you do, right? And it's no different. If you are a mother, you have children, you understand that this child needs that, this child does not. Like, this child is strong here, this child is weak here. It is the same thing, but we don't really give that much grace to adults, right? Because it's just like, oh, you're an adult, so, like, we don't look at adults through children's eyes, so therefore there's much more judgment there. But no, I understood, because, like, my experiences, I've gone through things in life where it's just felt like much easier to just be like, yo, I'm tapping out. Like, I can't. Like, people are cruel. Like, this world is just cruel. And you have people who feel things deeper than others. That is not a flaw. That is a gift. And we unfortunately exist in a world that does not make room for people like that. And a lot of times you are walking that existence alone, and is trying to find a community of people who understand and see you because they are the same, to be able to create a shield of, like, protection and support around you.
Completely agree. Hopefully, one day at a time, one step at a time, especially here in the Caribbean, we'll be more open, especially to mental health issues, and not shrug them off of something that is not.
Yeah, it's an ignorant perspective. My grandfather was epileptic. So as a kid, when he would have his episodes, I would be scared, because, like, I would see him in his episodes, and, he's shaking, and, his mouth would froth, and it was just traumatic, if I'm supposed to be honest, because it's my grandfather that I love out of this world. And I didn't understand it. And the thing that I recognized even then as a kid was like, the deep love I had for my grandfather, like in the moment when he had his episodes, I was scared. But like when he calmed down, like the thing I wanted the most to do was to like help him. And I couldn't, and I was just like, I don't, like what do I do? But they would say, and I mean, instead of owning that he had epilepsy, the narrative was that, oh, demons are on him, right? Which for me was just like, what? My grandfather? The nicest man, the most loving man? Like, what are you talking about? What demons? Like, that's what they would say. So he never got the help that he needed, right? He should have been on medication, right? But he wasn't, because it was just dismissed in Jamaica as like, oh, he just has demons on him. Like, I would hear stories of like, oh, he was in the tree and he fell out, and oh, Duppy boxed him out of the tree. Not no Duppy that boxed this man out of the tree. He had an epilepsy attack and he fell. And falling from that height is going to exacerbate the problem, and just like the ignorance in our thinking of just like, you wanna hold on to this belief so much, right? That you will choose that belief over the person you love, right? Over just like, what are you losing to just own that, like, or face that this is what he has and he needs help. He needs medication. It doesn't make him less off. It doesn't make him weaker. I think a lot of times we explain things through religion in Jamaica because it makes it better or more digestible for us. And like, a lot of times we do that in situations centering ourselves as opposed to centering the person that actually need the help. Because it's not about you, and it is funny because like my grandfather, I witnessed my grandfather's death as a kid. He had an epilepsy attack and he fell down the stairs, and I literally we were walking together and that he had the attack, and I watched him like roll all the way down the stairs and saw when his head like hit the last step. And I just, again, even as a kid, it was traumatic. And I just knew, I was just like, like, he's dead. And he went to the hospital and he never came back. And so like, for me, again, when I was younger, I didn't have all this knowledge or, this separation or perspective to even fully understand any of those. But like, it's a story I tell because as older, it breaks my heart because I'm just like, I could have had my grandfather longer with me if only people had prioritized what he needed over their comfortability and just the sadness of that, So to your point, like, I know it's challenging because when you love someone, you want the best for them. And in your estimation, they're not living up to that, or, they're not, why aren't they like me? And it's just like, we need to get away from trying to make people like us. Everybody is themselves. They're unique in their own ways, and acceptance will get us further than trying to mold people to be just like who we are. That's not how God wanted it or intended it. So like, as far as I know, if that's not what he wanted, that's not what we should be trying to do. And we are losing lives. We're losing relationships. We're losing community. We're losing connection because of our inability to just see people and accept them in all their flaws for who they are and love them anyways. Like, how to love people in the way that God loved us, which is unconditional. And we need to learn how to do that more. That is what is going to like save us or, or make things better at the least.
Because we're not just one part of ourselves. We're layered, right?
Yeah, we're multidimensional beings. No human being is one thing. That is a lie, right? And it's like, I always joke and say, if you watch a movie, you get excited as you discover different things about your character. We're more accepting of multidimensionalism in fictional shows than we are of people in real life, and and again, like nothing is absolute, right? Because like that's also what I want to like convey. Like life isn't black and white. Like nothing, it's not an absolute life, There are exceptions, there are caveats, which is why understanding context is important because an individual who does not make room for their complexity or their multidimensionalism if they can't do that for themselves, they will never be able to do that for anybody else. So sometimes which is why like you have to it is important for you to do your work and be aware so that you're able to know what is yours and what is not yours, right? To make that separation, because sometimes what you need from people, they really can't give it to you. And it's not out of spite. They just can't because they have yet to do that work for themselves. And you have to be able to, it's hard to recognize and it's challenging because you want to be understood and accepted by the people you love the most. But sometimes they don't have the capacity to do that. And you have to be able to recognize that and also learn or make the choice, am I going to love them and accept them as they are, knowing that they don't have the capacity to give me this thing, or am I not? So I just want to add that too.
Some stories weigh heavy, not for their pain, but for their truth. Sasha-Gay Lewis shows us what it means to give those truths a voice. And next episode, we step behind the storyteller, into the root, the mentors, and the legacy that shaped her journey. For this week's poem, we have one entitled Autumn's Last Leaf. Like the last autumn leaf, I cling to a time when it was spring, and meadows bloomed with pink iris. The sweet aroma filters to my nose, guiding me to your evenly embrace. But bitter is the sweet taste that lingers, knowing you are no longer a finger's touch away. But sweet is the bitterness left at a cup's base, having shared coffee and treats at our last meet. And I hope you liked that one this week. And for my other socials, you can check out my website at www.jd-morgan.com and Instagram page with handle j.d.morgan MORGAN_rights. As well as on Facebook, you could search for the profile j.d.morgan. And I am also on TikTok as j.d.morgan_rights. And if you've read my book, kindly go to Goodreads and search for my author name or the book itself and give a review, a very honest review. Thank you. You've been listening to Adventures of a Wallflower with J.D. Morgan, where silence gets loud. Be sure to subscribe and follow on your favorite platform so you never miss a story that speaks, challenges, and inspires.